Get ready for some epic petty revenge. Story 1. You think women look better without makeup? Great, don't look at me. A coworker of mine, M, 30s, who I've, F, 20s, spoken to a handful of times in my 3.5 years at this job and have only had pleasant but short interactions with, decided to get bold one night. I was doing my closing duties and was wearing a full face of makeup with some sparkly eyeshadow. If I come in for a late closing shift where I can sleep in and do makeup, I like to do something a little fun and extra. My guy had the audacity and gall to come up to me while I'm clearly busy. I just had to tell you something, okay? I think women look better without makeup. It's just too much. Did you do dance or something when you were younger? A natural face is better, he says while wrinkling his nose with a stank face while looking me right in my dolled-up eyes. Excuse me? Well, now that I know the makeup I like to do is a creep repellent, I'll happily go out of my way to wake up early and wear a full face of makeup every day for weeks. It was honestly a boost of motivation to wake up early and have an extra healthy breakfast too. So now he says hi, I nod and walk away. I'm your coworker, not some doll for you to ogle at. He also knew I have a long-term boyfriend who also works in the same place we do. Ick, ick, ick. Story 2. Decide we're not friends anymore? You've lost air fryer privileges. I have a roommate who was initially a close friend, and after an unfortunate series of events where I realized she's a terrible person, and from her perspective, I'm probably also no angel, our friendship has ended. Unfortunately, we're living together for another 2 weeks, one of which I'm away for, visiting my parents. Most of the kitchen equipment is mine, so as my little piece of petty revenge, I'm gifting my air fryer to my parents. She uses it way more than I do, pretty much every day, so it's certain to irk her at least a little bit. It's petty, but it will grant me a fair amount of joy. Hee hee. Edit. Loving all the puns in the comments, keep them coming, tears of joy. Story 3. Kick my door, see what happens. I donated blood and got a $15 gift card, signed into the wrong account by accident that didn't have Prime and gave that the gift card, for unrelated reasons I can't say, brought a shy guy mask instead. My little brother has been acting out, it's nothing new. His bad behavior ranged from foul language, throwing tantrums, breaking things, and more importantly, kicking doors. My mom been overseas working, so when she comes back she's too burned out. My grandma is basically useless and he says he hates me no matter how I approach him. I tried being a gentle brother, a stern brother, and a nonchalant brother. Nothing works, so I decided to double down. Normally he likes being scared and laughs, but for some reason when he sees my shy guy mask scares him shitless. So when he kicks my door after a few light warnings, I put on my shy guy mask, wait for the next kick, then swing the door open and let out a blood-curdling scream. I do things that range from crawling like the Exorcist when he opens the door after several kicks, running at him with it on, sitting in a chair and slowly turning my neck at him while pointing, etc. Whatever's funniest in the moment. This makes him cry, then a few moments later he kicks my door again, so I give him less warnings each time. Edit. The Mario character. Story 4. Blame me for the missing food. Well, enjoy not having any more. This happened over 15 years ago when I started college. I stayed at a relative's house that they turned into a small apartment. Most of the residents there were okay, along with my cousin and his buddies. We had a joint kitchen and my parents gave me a generous allowance, especially for food to share with everyone. As they were still teens and young adults, they ate a lot. I at the time was big but didn't eat much as I didn't move around much. This straightened the second month of living there. My cousin told me not to take too much food as they were having to be frugal the last few days before they get their allowance, salary. Here's the rub. I would spend minimum of $200 for groceries. Mostly food that you can just heat up in the microwave, oven. But my cousin and his buddies would have friends over and help themselves to whatever. Other roommates didn't contribute, maybe because they didn't use the kitchen or only leave condiments. They'd go through food and the last week they'd have to be frugal as hell. Bread with water, rice with salt. Hell, they'd even go around places to get leftovers. I probably contributed over 75% of the food but didn't eat much as mentioned above, but also because I would eat out as my schedule was busy. They would insult me based on my size, subtly and not so subtly. One time I came home with them having a barbecue and immediately my cousin made to hide the food and his buddies told me if they offered me any it would be gone. So I stopped buying food. Simple, right? Well, instead of them being frugal the last week, they had to be frugal going into the second week of the month. They couldn't hold their get-togethers and they certainly couldn't get their favorites, especially the spam, as it was quite expensive in our area. I once came home and they were just idling in the kitchen. They were making a meal out of a couple of eggs and clearly past their shelf-life vegetables. My cousin cut back on his vices as he realized he can get drunk and starve and vice versa. They were miserable for months until I gave them a saving throw and brought some fried chicken. I left after my first semester for reasons, but by then my cousin and his buddies were very eager to kiss my ass just for spam. Story 5. My friend's BF moved out with no warning, leaving her high and dry. My friend renting a house had a roommate move out and struggling with the rent. Her BF moved in and paid rent as well. They've been dating and living together for over a year when at work, she receives a call where he said he had an anxiety attack, called his mom, who coddles the shit out of him, and moved out. And I mean moved out. Took everything they could pack in the truck and just left, leaving my friend high and dry with no warning in regards to rent. She suddenly has to move out and back to her parents. I ended up buying a TV from her which is still signed into some of his streaming services. Well, I fucked with all of his shows, recommend shows, saved, liked the works. Changed his profile name to Coward. Made another profile where the saved shows spell out the word pussy. Story 6. No TV for you. Years ago, I lived in Las Vegas with a bunch of guys. Yes, we were. But only 2 in the house were together. And there was one half of a couple that was, for want of a better word, a little bitch. Everyone, except the other half, had issues with this guy. I could make a list, but it'll just make the story longer. Anyway, I would visit my parents in Utah every few weeks. This left roomies free reign over the TV and whatnot. Now, this was my TV. This was in the OO and I had a snazzy surround sound with sub setup and big screen. I had no problem with roomies using it, but let's be honest, I was usually the one in control. This kid was being a real punk, just shitty, and I was not here for it. His parents were coming into town the weekend I was going to be in Utah. I overheard him telling them all about how he was going to have a party and watch movies, etc. I decided I wasn't going to support that. I put all the remotes in my room and locked the door. I also removed the batteries and took the main sound system remote with me. This was for a Sony system back in the day that used a remote called an AirEgg that used an on-screen menu. You were doing nothing without the remote. I barely made it into Utah before my cell phone went nuts. I finally answered after he tried several times. He was screaming so loud and so high that I was in fear of my windshield breaking. My weekend was wonderful. Things were a bit tense for a few weeks after I returned. But I wasn't heartbroken. Story 7. Using my phone number for your reservation for V-Day? Not this time. I have a pretty easy Google Voice number that people tend to use to make reservations. I've gotten hundreds over the years and it's mildly annoying. There's usually a link in the confirmation text messages to cancel, which I always do on the day of the reservation. This last Tuesday I got a text saying that my reservation was confirmed for today. Except I didn't make one and I don't live in that city. So I patiently waited to cancel it today. Today I got another text saying, your reservation is at 6 p.m. Click the link to cancel. Well, bud, your girl is gonna be pissed you were too lazy to use your own number because tonight's reservation just got canceled. Happy V-Day, chump. No Mexican food dinner for you. Story 8. I got revenge on my stepdad for selling my dead grandmother's jade pendant necklace. I 23. Lost my grandma due to COVID complications in January of 2022. I had bought my grandma a jade necklace pendant and bought myself a rose quartz pendant. Her necklace costed $200. This was because it was wrapped in real gold and it was a huge piece of jade. My mother's husband, my stepdad, treated my grandmother and I horribly. He abused me for years and treated my grandma like a slave. My grandma raised all of my siblings and my youngest half-brother on my mom's side is my stepdad's son. Not even 24 hours after her death, my mom, narcissistic mother, told me she would go through her room at the end of the week. Not even 24 hours later, her room was cleared and I noticed a fat wad of cash in my stepfather's hand. I asked my stepdad if I could have my grandma's jade pendant back. It was very important to me because it was hers and she wore it all the time. My stepdad told me that he sold it because everything in her room was his now. I was infuriated. I never felt that kind of rage before. The following day I plotted my revenge. While my mother and husband were gone I got busy. For context, my mother and her husband depended on me a lot while living with them. I took his brand new laptop that he bought from selling my dead grandma's jade pendant and filled the bathtub up with water. I dropped it in the water and left it there for a good 10 minutes. I took his laptop charger and cut a small hole that he couldn't see in it. I also made sure to dry the laptop off really well and put everything back where it belonged. I went even further. I took everything I bought in that kitchen and donated it to the people who really needed it. The air fryer I bought? Donated. The microwave I bought? Donated. The plates, bowls and cups? Donated. The pantry cabinet I bought? Donated. I took it up a notch. I took all the toiletries I bought with my money out of the bathroom. I locked all of them in a lockbox. You sell my dead grandma's pendant? No more laptop. No more of anything I bought. The icing on the cake, I had proof of purchase of my dead grandmother's pendant. I made his workplace aware that he is a thief. Edit. I moved out in May of 2022. I've been no contact with both of them for a long time. Story 9. I ruined a friend's game as revenge for something I had suspected a few years prior. So, when I was 16, I had this friend that I hadn't really talked to in a few years because I had strongly suspected him of stealing an action figure from my younger brother. Well, over time, my feelings about this had cooled somewhat by the time I reconnected with him, and I didn't have any friends at the time, so I figured what the hell. Thing is, I felt like anything we did was something he always wanted to do. Always what he wanted to eat, what he wanted to watch, what he wanted to listen to, always what he wanted to play despite so-called rules about guest right whether I was at his house or he was at mine. Well, I got tired of this. It got to where my prior feelings about him having stole my brother's action figure, which he later confirmed he did in fact steal, but at this point it was just a strong suspicion of mine, had started to creep back up, and I decided to do something dastardly. I was over at his house one night, and he put in this boring as shit military game into his Xbox. I honestly don't remember which one it was, as those aren't my type of game. After a while, he put in Halo, which I did enjoy playing somewhat, but then he mentioned having a few matches and going back to the other game. I was dreading the shit out of this. Well, his parents were cooking and hollered to let us know dinner was done. He went to go get his dinner, and while he was gone, I got the other game out of the case, took a pocket knife, and put a deep cut into the disc from the center on out, and did so quickly, so I wasn't too far behind in getting dinner to avoid suspicion. I put the disc back in the case and went to get dinner. I came back to his room and we ate, and he got ready to put the game in. I was a bit nervous, but I already had a bullshit story ready. He put the game in, turned it on, and the game froze and would not progress past the title screen. He said, "What the fuck?" I asked him what was wrong, and he started to get a little upset, and he kept turning the system on and back off, and never got any further than the title screen. He took the disc out and looked at it and said, "I don't understand, it worked before." I told him to let me look at it, and I whistled, the one that starts off high and goes low. I said, "That looks to me like laser burn." He asked what that was. I told him that sometimes lasers in game systems and DVD players can put a line in discs, making them unplayable. He got pissed and said, "God fucking damn it, I loved that game." He put his head in his hands, and I patted him on the back to show support. We played Halo rest of the night, and I reassured him that the same thing won't happen. It didn't hang out with him after. This is a confession, but also? F you, Jacob. I mowed yards in the hot-ass humid summer to get that Dragon Ball Z future trunks for my baby brother. Story 10. Make fun of an old lady? Be ready for a haircut. A few years ago, I went to a concert in Fort Lauderdale by myself to see Boy George. I was in my mid-50s, as were a lot, but not most, of the crowd. 2 rows in front of me, I saw an elderly woman also by herself. She was dressed in unusual clothing and her hair was a bit of a mess, but boy, she really enjoyed the concert and didn't care what anyone thought. She was my hero, and I got the courage to stand up and dance, too. After a few minutes, 2 mid-20s couples decided that an elderly woman who was different than everyone else had no business enjoying the concert, so they started throwing little candies at her until she turned around. When she did, they all laughed in her face, pointing at her like they were in first grade. Seeing her cower and sit down made me furious, so I tapped one of the women on the shoulder, and when she turned around, I said, "Please be kind." Her partner turned around and told me to shut up and mind my own business. They continued to throw candy at her, and after about 5 minutes, she left and never returned. Did I mention said younger woman had the most lovely, thick, beautiful, silky, long black hair? Yeah, I thought how terrible it would be if gum got stuck in her hair. What a nightmare. I'm an avid gum chewer, so I took a stick of gum out of my purse, properly chewed it, and over the next hour or so, as she flipped her hair back on occasion, I was able to work it well into her hair without her ever noticing. It was so stuck that I almost felt badly, but then I thought, make fun of an old lady, get a haircut. I still smiled thinking about it, knowing that as she found it, my old lady face popped in her head as she realized it was me who did it. Story 11. Hurt my brother? You'll see what it feels like. This happened in September of 2005. Our son, Tom, 3, had been diagnosed on the autism spectrum about 9 months prior. Tom would engage with his sister, Ellie, 5, but would not typically make an effort to engage other children. He also had a significant speech delay. While our kids are 2 years apart, our daughter takes after me, I'm 5 feet 3 inches, and our son takes after my husband, he's 6 feet. We would frequently be asked if the kids were twins because they were so close in height. Our family had been invited to a birthday party for twin 1-year-olds. There were a lot of people at the party that I had known growing up, but hadn't seen in years. Most of them had brought their young children as well. Our kids were having a great time jumping around in the inflatable bounce house. Given the age of our children and our son's diagnosis, we had eyes on them at all times. A little boy, I'll call him Mark, that I didn't know ran up to our son and knocked him down. Mark looked about 3 or 4. Tom had not interacted with Mark in any way prior to this. The child ran away laughing. Our daughter helped Tom get up and then brought him over to us to make sure he was okay. Ellie was super protective of her younger brother and wanted to push Mark down. I told her it was probably an accident and the kids went back to jumping. A couple of minutes later, Mark pushed Tom down again. After pushing Tom down, Mark ran over to a couple who I assumed were his parents. Ellie brought Tom over to us and she was furious. She really wanted to push Mark down. I told her no, that I would speak to his parents. I recognized Mark's father and made my way over. I said hello, made some chit-chat, and asked him to tell his son not to push my son down. He said he would take care of it. The kids resumed playing. Mark then pushed Tom down a third time. Ellie went up to Mark and told him to stop pushing her brother. Mark responded with, I don't have to listen to you. We were all furious and Tom was upset. He didn't understand why this child kept pushing him down. Ellie asked again, for the third time, to push Mark down. We gave her permission to. She ran across the bounce house and tackled Mark. When they both stood up, she pushed him down, saying, stay away from my little brother. Mark began to cry and made his way to his parents. His dad looked over at me and I just gave him the, oh well, look. Mark left the bounce house. We avoided their family for the rest of the party. Story 12. Wind up the server, get what you deserve. This is actually a friend of mine's petty revenge, but I just remembered it and it always makes me laugh. When my friend was about 16, their first job was on a rotisserie counter in a big supermarket. Every Friday night the same woman would come in and without fail stand at the counter and inspect every single cooked chicken on display, and every time without fail she'd point to the one in the very furthest corner and yell, that chicken. So my friend would basically have to crawl into the display over all the other perfectly good chickens to get it. This went on for weeks until eventually friend got the mankiest, skinniest chicken they could find, overcooked it till it was like leather, and put it in the prime spot. Sure enough, chicken lady came in, inspected every single chicken, pointed at the same one and yelled, that chicken. Never did it again after that. Also started saying please and thank you, rolling on the floor laughing. Story 13. I forgot to delete a story that will horrify a former friend. And I hope she accidentally reads it and pukes. For context, I used to be friends with someone who turned out to be a self-absorbed mooch. We became friends in high school, 15-ish years ago, but it wasn't until a couple years ago that I realized how bad of a friend she is. Prior to that time, we had made a shared folder on Google Docs and were working on a story together. We had a bad falling out, and I haven't talked to her in over a year. Now it's relevant that she is absolutely averse to male genitalia, even mention of a penis results in gagging. While drunk, I had used one of the forgotten shared documents to write gay smut. For those of you that remember the citrus scale, this was building up to be a lemon before I got too tired to finish writing it. Since she hadn't said anything about it, I'm assuming she didn't notice. However, a couple days ago, she decided to go off on me after I accidentally sent her a completely innocuous message and a subsequent apology for accidentally tagging her in a message. So, I copied anything I wanted out of the shared docs before I removed my access. What I didn't do was delete anything. So, I've left her with 2 pages of BL gay male smut. I hope she reads it and pukes. Story 14. Coffee at work. So the secretary in the office makes coffee. Sometimes, when the director is there, but not for anyone else. I was making some for the office and realized that I can't drink a pot of coffee myself, so I got a Keurig single cup for free on Buy Nothing. I brought it into the office, set it up, brought in K-cups for anyone that wanted it. I come in yesterday and she's cleaned off the counter of everything but her coffee pot. So now when she makes coffee I take almost all of it and leave just enough so it won't crack the glass. Most of the coffee goes gold. I can't drink that much. It makes me happy. Edit. Just to clarify, her formal title is administrative assistant. She refers to herself as the main office secretary, and so that is the term that I used because that is how she refers to herself. I do not believe in having any administrative assistant make my coffee for me. The last admin that worked with me made me coffee once when I was having a bad day. It was a very kind gesture, and I also did the same for her. Edit 2. My cute little pink free Keurig is safe and sound on top of the mini fridge. I can't put it on my desk because I work in a school setting where the appliances have to be near the sink in the workroom. My K-cups are safe. They were in the cabinet. Story 15. Rental house. Lack of maintenance. Some backstory. The house beside me was purchased by an investor and has 5 capable adults living there. They moved into the house in October 2023. The first winter, they shoveled snow once, Canada, and the summer. They mowed the grass only when bylaw notices were received. This winter, we have had a number of significant snowfalls, finally justifying my snowblower. I've used it 6x this winter and have shoveled probably 30 times. The neighbor has shoveled 0 times. Last week they had a plow come out after receiving a bylaw notice, but the plow did a terrible job and left a compact layer of ice 3 inches thick. Today, my next door neighbor was clearing snow from his car, 6 inches or 15 centimeters last night, with what looked like a plastic cutting board. He got only the side and front window done. My snow brush was leaning up against my garage and I shoveled the side of the driveway facing him without saying a word. Then he tried to get out but was just spinning his tires. So he started shoveling a bit around his car. I left my snowblower in the space closest to his house and cleared my walkway out of view. Then I saw him try to leave again, spin his tires. I took my snowblower across the street and cleared 2 neighbors' driveways. His car is beached in the snow and it seems he's abandoned the idea of leaving for the day. Story 16. A customer screamed at me once, so now I eat his favorite food. When I was a university student, I worked in a little supermarket for over a year. I was 19 at the time, and since UK minimum wages are age-based, I was making very, very little. We had a really complicated machine for printing and cashing lottery tickets, and any corrections and refunds had to be signed off by the manager who was never around when we needed him. Cashing 1 ticket alone took something like 15 steps. It was wild. So, for the first few weeks, I was quite slow at it in order to avoid making any mistakes. Well, on my second day there, an old guy turned up and in addition to some food, he wanted a few lottery tickets. He didn't seem to appreciate my lack of speed, and leaned in to about 8 inches away from my face to scream, yes. When I tried to check if the numbers I was about to print off were correct. In retrospect, it really wasn't that big of a deal, but I was young and very small, so his screaming and towering over me was enough to make me feel upset and afraid. He looked very pleased with himself for making the young girl earning a few pounds an hour tremble with fear. I'd already had a bit of retail experience under my belt from a prior job, but that day, I cried in the employee bathrooms for the very first time. The job was not great, so I was brought to tears by customers a few more times during my time there, but I was broke and a fast learner, so I was always available for overtime. I ended up working 45 to 55 hours a week, and the guy turned out to be a regular, which meant that he had absolutely known I was new, and I got to serve him often over the next year or so. Joy. I also got the hang of things and did pretty much everything else there, from training others, keeping the refrigerator's temperature log, ordering stock, logging and clearing waste, expired items and those with a broken seal, to reducing items which had reached their sell-by date 25% off at 9 a.m., 50% off at 12 p.m., and finally 75% off at 4 p.m. Well, one benefit was that I learned a few things about the miser who had screamed at me, like how he was nasty to everyone working there, especially the younger ladies, how he was retired and seemingly not very well off, and how he appeared to keep track of food sell-by dates, and would regularly turn up soon after certain meat-based items had been reduced for the final time. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with being old or on a budget, but it's always a bad idea to scream at people just because you're having a bad day and they're not allowed to defend themselves. Especially the ones who handle your food. The other benefit was that, because I was working there full-time, I was the one serving him 99% of the time, which gave me ample opportunities to deliver my petty revenge. And it was going to be a slow burn, like cooking a frog, as they say. Being a broke university student, I figured that I could both stick it to him and save myself a bit money, since food price reductions stacked with my employee discount. He never screamed at me again, but for 10 months, I hid all of his nearly expired favorites behind the dairy items, and purchased them for myself once he'd left in a huff after finding them gone. I didn't even care for sausages all that much, but I regularly ate something called toad in a hole, out of sheer spite, and the vile git probably managed to buy reduced sausages maybe 5 times in 10 months. He got visibly more and more upset over time because other shoppers had seemingly caught onto his strategy. I always nodded sympathetically. Sorry, we've sold the last ones. Maybe try again later in the week? I actually rather like toad in a hole now, and have it as a special revenge treat. It reminds me of that time I cooked a frog for nearly a year. Don't scream at the people who handle your food. Edit. Fixed some minor errors and added a little pun because I couldn't help it. Story 17. Guy tried to scam me in Rome, so I threw his scam product in an inconvenient location. When I was in Rome, we had read about these scams people do. One of which was trying to give you free stuff, but guilt-tripping you into giving them something, usually money, in return. At one point this happened. My whole group, who I had informed about this, fell for it. I declined to take a bracelet. Basically, guy comes up and asks where we are from. When you tell him, he makes some random-ass connection between there and where he is from and claims you are family. Then offered to give you something from his family, and then ties these bracelets in your arm which are hard to get off. Then he asks if you have anything for his family. Holding his hand out, my son then proceeds to hand this man $20. This is what it is. He was fine with it. This wasn't the issue. This was just me having seen this scam in process, and now I was aware of how it worked in more detail. Also, we found these same identical bracelets at a small shop like 10 minutes later for about 30 cents USD. The petty part. So the next day I'm by myself walking by the Coliseum and one of these guys asks me where I am from. Knowing that he's going to try and make a connection, I say that I'm from the moon. He's caught off guard but continues his pitch anyway. I tell him I'm not interested, but he stays nagging me. I tell him over and over I'm not interested, but he keeps harassing me. So finally I stop and I'm like, what is it? He says, I want to give you something from my family to yours, bro. That's it. And I say, for free, and he says, yeah, free from my family to yours. And so I'm feeling petty cause he's been harassing me. I take the bracelet and say thanks and immediately turn and abruptly start walking. He dashes to catch up to me and is like, yo bro, you got anything for my family? And I say, no man, sorry, and continue walking. He then grabs me by the shoulder and looks me dead in the eye and says, give it back. And I am like, what? He says, give it back, again more stern. The sales pitch nice guy voice is no more. So I was like, this bracelet, which I was holding and not wearing, and he holds out his hand. I say, this is mine. You gave it to me. He says, no, it's not free. I then reminded him that he specifically said, free from his family. He then tries to cut me off as I'm about to cross the street. He starts swearing at me. So I take his bracelet and huck it down a 20-foot drop to the ground level of the area outside the Coliseum. He could still go get it, but he would have to walk all the way around the ramp and far away from me. He then starts swearing at me. Fuck you, over and over. He then hawks like he's going to spit on me, and I tell him that's a very bad idea. Finally he turns and walks away. Story 18. Old guy at the state fair yelled at a little girl for standing in front of the butter sculpture, so I took revenge for her. This happened last summer. Like the title says, I was at the state fair, looking at the butter sculpture. This old dude is standing next to me recording as it spins around, because the sculpture had 2 different sides to it. This little girl, maybe 3 if I had to guess, runs up to it and presses her face and hands against the glass all excited. I laughed because I found it cute. I remember being young and that excited for silly things. But the old dude next to me immediately starts bitching. Specifically, he said, Jesus Christ, get out of the way. And keep in mind, this girl is not even tall enough to mess with his precious video. If anything, he should have been happy to catch a genuine state fair moment. But nope, apparently in his mind he deserves to get a completely uninterrupted video. The mom awkwardly apologized and pulled her daughter back. I was immediately fucking livid though. As soon as it got to the point that the butter sculpture was turning to the side he hadn't recorded, I slowly walked in front of him and past his camera so that I blocked all the important stuff. As I was walking away he goes, "You're a real asshole, y'all know that?" And I shot back, "Dude, what does that make you? You yelled at a little girl because you need your video that bad." He huffed and puffed and goes, "Well, you're still an asshole." I just laughed and kept walking away at that point. Made eye contact with the mom before I left though. She had a huge smile on her face, gave me a nod, and mouthed, "Thank you." One of the most satisfying moments of my life, honestly. Story 19. Colleague made fun of me and in return I mess with his stuff for months. So I work in a big company as a leader of a maintenance team. One of our technical supervisors, who does kind of a planning and organizing job, sat one day in my chair at my desktop when I came in for shift change about 6 months ago. He had messed with my chair and had it at the lowest possible position and the angle of the backside was low like he planned to sleep in the chair. So I complained to him that I had to adjust it back, which is not a big deal. But then he started to make fun of me in a really annoying manner, called me a crybaby and was seriously upset about my complaint. He just didn't stop. The thing is now that I usually work night shifts and as I have access to his office, it's a big office for 20 people. I waited for some time and then started to mess with his stuff about 3 months ago. I pulled the plug of his mouse so it's loose multiple times. I changed the height of his chair just a bit but enough to be realized. I rearranged the stuff on his desk. Single items from left to right most of the time. I added drops and put one little drop of sugar on his return key. I loosened the screw of his armrest a bit so it wasn't fixed anymore. I exchanged the mine of a pen with an empty one, twice. I pulled about 20 pages of a post-it apart and put them back together so they barely stick anywhere. And some more. Lots of little inconveniences about 2 times a week for the last months. Edit. To celebrate this thread I went there tonight and loosened the screws of the handle of the drawer in the desk a little bit. I wiggles a tiny bit now. Story 20. Telling her she's a bad teacher without telling her she's a bad teacher. I mentioned this in a comment and someone suggested I post the full story. We've all had those teachers that take their problems out on us, and this story is how I indirectly shamed one of the worst I've publicly encountered. A few years back I was traveling with my family and we were taking a bus to our next stop. My mom, an amazing teacher of over 20 years, was sitting next to me, calmly reading and not paying much attention. There was a mother and daughter pair seated directly behind us, probably mid-50s and late 20s. My phone battery was already low and I didn't want it to die so I was staring out the window people watching. I couldn't help but overhear the loud conversation between the ladies behind me. I soon realized they were both teachers. While the daughter seemed like a decent person, the mother was ranting about how much she hated her students and how happy it made her to torture them. From context I guessed the kids were around 12 to 13 years old. A few examples. If you turn in anything, test, homework, class work, even 1 second late, regardless of reason, 70% is the max grade you can get. Apparently she wanted it lower but admin would get suspicious if you ask a question she doesn't like. You get shamed in front of the class. She had a running list on the wall tracking how many homework assignments each student missed with snarky comments. Would hide it when admin came by. One student missed a few weeks of class for a death in the family and she told the whole school it was because he's dramatic and lazy. Admitted to slapping at least 7 students and was only caught once. Instigated fights in student friend groups for entertainment. Verbal abuse in general. I heard all of this over a 45-minute period. And the mother seemed so disgustingly proud. The daughter kept trying to tell her how wrong it was to treat students like that but the mom just laughed and called her stupid, naive, etc. This bitch talked about how school was hell for her growing up so she wants these new kids to suffer just as much if not more. She even said it was the best kind of therapy. I was appalled to say the least. Who the hell treats children like that and then insults their actual child when called out for it? I never heard names or identifiers to report it officially, so I started thinking. For once I had an idea that would make my usual problem of complaining perfect for this situation. I texted my mom something along the lines of, "The woman behind us is a teacher and a bitch. I'm gonna go on a rant and I need you to go along with it. Close your book when ready." As soon as she saw the text she looked at me and smiled. It was time. I started going on a long, loud rant about Professor Smith, at my college that treated the students so poorly. I listed examples similar to the ones the bitch said, with minor tweaks and changes, all the while talking about how much of a negative impact it had on us personally and academically. I whined about how she takes her hate and insecurities out on us and how miserable everyone is because she's just an overgrown bully on a power trip. I mentioned that even the other professors avoid her because they're disgusted by how she treats us. I ended it by saying I love my amazing teacher mom and know she would never do any of those things, because what kind of a loser takes out their frustration on kids? My mom played along perfectly and we changed the subject after that. I didn't hear a peep from behind us the rest of the ride. It was amazing to loudly complain about her in this metaphorical way. All the things she was proud of, I exposed as the abuses they actually were. All on a crowded bus with at least an hour left to our destination. My mom was impressed when she got the details later. I wanted to say something to the daughter afterwards because I felt bad she got caught in the crossfire, but they shuffled off the bus with incredible speed. I wonder why. ETA. My mom and I both desperately wanted to report her, but we had no evidence and nothing to identify either of them. Believe me, if we could've, we would've. Story 21. Parallel parking, the right way. A decade ago, I was a new young parent, not super relevant. Just a lazy to walk excuse, I guess? Going to meet family at a parade. There was a parking spot open only half a block away. Would normally expect to park many blocks away, but this was a very tight spot, so most were probably scared off. This spot was tight and I enjoyed being good at parallel parking. Pulled up next to the car in front of the spot, put it in reverse, and a group of, I assume, high school-aged boys pulled nose into the spot. Saw them in my rear-view mirror, laughing and high-fiving their unjust plunder. Feeling defeated, I put my car in drive, but realized before moving, you could only park in that spot if you were in the exact place I was. You couldn't cheat and nose in and back and forth it, so I put my car in park and watched the rear-view mirror. After a few moments the realization dawned on them. They were at a 45 degrees angle and they couldn't steal that spot. Watching the smiles fade from their faces as they backed out and left was magical. We exchanged hand gestures and I got my spot. And just to clarify, I don't mind walking. I love an excuse to walk, but the entitlement and rudeness they showed was too much. Story 22. I just needed some change. I was on vacation with my family and we were hopping RV campgrounds along the way. We found a site in the morning where you could reserve a spot for $30 with a Dropbox envelope, which is not uncommon for campsites where a caretaker is not always on site. Problem is we only had $20 cash, so we drove down the way a bit to a podunk gas station so I could find an ATM. I get the 20 from the machine, then I ask the attendant if he is able to change it for me into 2 10s. He says no. It was a very grumpy no, not a, sorry can't open the register without a purchase, no. I could tell he adamantly did not want to give me change for some reason. So I decided to force his hand. I pick up a stick of gum that cost less than $1 and ask to be checked out. He begrudgingly does so and audibly mutters, "Son of a bitch," under his breath while giving me my change. If not for that I would have let the situation be, but since he spoke I retorted with, "That wasn't that hard, was it?" Once I pocketed my money I left pretty quickly and heard him yell from inside, "Don't come back here." So all I could respond was, "You can be sure of that." Sure enough I have never been back, and I have no idea why him needing to give me change pissed him off so much. Story 23. The completely legal way to mess with someone's food. I work in a cafeteria in a factory, so almost all my customers are regulars and I get to know what they like and don't like. There's one woman on nights who absolutely hates peas, won't even try to eat around them. She loves any kind of chicken soup and is always a little upset if there are peas in it. Last week we had a chicken soup with no peas, but she still got mad because we had the noodles for it on the side so they wouldn't turn to mush in the soup. It's how we do noodle soups. You add the noodles to your bowl and then add the soup. Today we have chicken and wild rice soup, which I know she's crazy for. I had to add to it, take sure we'll have enough for midnights. I don't have the time to chop up carrots like the guy on days. Guess I'll just have to use the frozen peas and carrots. Oh well, can't really cater to one person while serving 100. No soup for you. Story 24. My dad's whistling Cadillac. My dad bought a brand new Cadillac in the late 60s, early 70s. It had wind noise, whistling at freeway speeds with the windows up and the HVAC off. He had it at the dealership 3 times with the text saying they heard nothing. The warranty was almost up and my dad went back again. Finally they have a tech drive while he rode shotgun. The tech lit up a cigarette, turned on the radio, drove on the freeway and told my dad he heard nothing. My dad suggested that he drives and to see if they hear it then. Once the tech pulled over on the breakdown lane of the freeway, got out and closed the door, my dad hit the door locks, slid across the bench seat and took off with that asshole on the side of the road about 3 miles away from the dealership. A few months later he takes the car back to the same dealership and drops it off for an oil change. The dealership calls him up and says they noticed a whistling noise and they can fix it for $300. My dad says it's been there for that same issue a few times already and the mechanics at the shop couldn't find it. The service writer says, "Oh, you're the guy who left our guy on the side of the road. Don't worry, we'll take care of you." When he picked up the car, they asked for his side of the story and he told them. I have a feeling they had a talk with that guy. Want to hear more petty revenge wins? Subscribe and stay tuned. Story 25. My best comeback. When I was a freelancer, I would deposit my checks on Saturday mornings. It was a nice day, so I decided to ride my bike to the ATM. When I got there, there were a few people around. 2 people were lined up and waiting for the ATM. I noticed a dude who wasn't in the line at first, but he got in line behind me. I was thinking he might not like waiting because I had to fill in the check amounts and total on the slip. Anyway, it was my turn at the ATM. As I was filling out my deposit slip, he started tapping his foot as to let me know I was holding him up. As I entered my deposit, the ATM suddenly went out of order. The screen came down and I tried to lighten the mood saying, "I think I broke it." Dude replied, "I know a lot of people who don't know how to use an ATM." I replied, "I bet you do." Then he said, "Phoo." I just laughed and laughed. He walked away and as I was putting my stuff away, the ATM suddenly came back to life. I finished my business and went on my merry way. I finally had the perfect comeback and damn it felt good. Story 26. Every religion I could find. Years ago I was working as a cook in an upscale restaurant in Calgary. At the time my family was still living back east before they moved west. I had a week off so I flew home to see the wife and kids. When I came back someone had filled my toolbox, full of all my knives etc., with gelatin. So not only were they suspended in gelatin but the gelatin was rotting because it sat there for a week. I found out pretty quickly who it was. Typical class clown. I didn't say anything to him but over the period of a month I found out everything I could about the guy. Full name, address, phone, postal code, social insurance number, email. Everything. So, after saying nothing for a month I was ready. I went online and signed him up for every religion I could find. And not just what we think of as legitimate Western religions. I mean, all of them. Church of Satan, Hare Krishnas, Catholic, Protestant, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, everything. About a week later he starts complaining about all the religious mail he was getting and he couldn't figure out why. His roommate was my supervisor. He figured out it was me, but he also said he wouldn't tell the guy because he was having too much fun watching his reactions. Then the visit started. JW wouldn't leave him alone. Mormons kept banging on the door. Some cults came visiting. They even had the Hare Krishnas dancing on their front lawn. He thought it might be me, but nobody ever confirmed it. He tried to get me to respond, but I was always able to keep a straight face. The restaurant got sold and closed shortly after that. I have no idea if he ever found out it was me. 27. Big bro to the rescue. A little background. I work in an industry that uses almost exclusively unionized labor, with the workplace ran by an office of non-unionized managers of a sort. I work in a fairly specialized capacity because of my licensure, where I basically spend long stretches of time with nothing to do. However, when I am needed, it's very, very urgent. The managers often think that, because of this, my position is an unnecessary expense and proceed to treat us as such. So, at this particular point in time, I, 33M, am working with my younger cousin, let's call her N, 27F, are working in the same capacity. I've always looked at her as a younger sister and always looked after her growing up. But she didn't really need it here, she was an ace at her job. But even so, there was one particular person in the office, the second highest ranking manager D, 57F, that absolutely hated NN, had some social anxiety, but was very good with people. And even given the emergent nature of our work, she always kept a cool head. Unless, that's as D was around. D always went out of her way to make sure she found something wrong with something N was doing. Even though we are licensed, and she had no idea what she was talking about. It was infuriating and started bowing up to D whenever N was involved. This obviously made me a target as well, but I don't mind. I worked retail through college and have a ridiculously thick skin. Until, one day, she tried to get me to break the law on the clock. My job involves filling out and handling confidential documents containing personal information as a part of its functions. The laws surrounding what I am allowed to, prohibited from turning over to my employer are complicated, and I have spent years learning them. Dee asked for information she was not entitled to, and I refused. She threatened my job. I stood strong. She dropped it after verbally berating me. It wasn't until she went off on N again that I had had enough. I put my plan into motion. You see, Dee was required to be on hand in a workspace where it was imperative that outside sound was kept to a minimum. This was right after the first Apple Watch came out, and all of the office was wearing them. It was the last week of this job before we started a new one. We're gig workers, so I put my plan into action. I went on Google and searched valuable Pokemon cards. Lo and behold, I found a great image of all the Gen 1 Halos in a sleeve. Saved. Went to Craigslist with a burner email and posted under the guise of an empty nester who had come across these after cleaning out her son's room. He got into college, isn't that something? I said that I had no idea what they were with and just wanted to sell them for $40 OBO. Then typed her phone number into the bottom line of the ad with words for the numbers. Then I walked to the work floor and proceeded to watch my deed unfold. Just as I had guessed, Dee had been in a big dick energy mood that morning and hadn't silenced her cell phone or Apple Watch. A double blessing from gods of mischief. It went dead as silent to a mix of an downright offensive electronic ringing mixed with phone speakers blaring the hoo 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 hoo. Part of You Make My Dream Come True by Hall & Oates. Now, important detail, our work floor always had visitors from other branches of the company with exotic job titles like unit manager, coordinator, executive VP of, director of, you get the idea. Those guys technically have no authority over me, but I'll be damned if Dee isn't very concerned with keeping these people happy. Their reactions to this interruption is less than friendly. At this point Dee goes into full panic mode. I had bad never seen before. She starts swatting at her phone trying to turn it off. She finally walks away in answer. I couldn't make out the conversation, but overheard the words, "What? Pokemon? Don't call," in very irritated whispers. She hangs up the phone as aggressively as you can with an iPhone, with intention of rejoining the group, only to be stopped in her tracks again by her shrieking wrist and hoo 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 hoo. This time, every head turns back in incredulous anger. You can see Dee isn't drowning. I almost felt bad for her. She walks off at a furious pace, answering the phone with the most polite hello she could manage. She walks through the door, and I overhear her say, "What goddamn Pokemon cards?" N has been standing next to me the entire time, and has noticed the deranged look of glee on my face. She knows it was me. When we got back to our office, I show her the ad, and we lose it. We get the hysterical laughter out of system, and walk back to the floor, only to see Dee standing there with everyone, fuming about what had happened. She's pissed, but she can't direct it at anyone. Came to find out, she put anyone in the office working under her on finding out why she was getting these calls, and who was responsible. This freaked N out a little bit, but I wasn't worried. I covered my tracks just fine. In fact, it had the opposite effect. Turns out, someone found my ad and flagged it for removal. Touché, office. But I wasn't done. So, I decided to do a second ad, because why not? This time, I found a picture on Google of a full room-sized replica of the city of Paris, all made out of Legos. Saved. Then I posted an ad offering free Legos with assembly assistance. Back on the floor. Hoo 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 hoo. More angry faces snapping back. More of Dee fumbling her electronic devices. I was damn shocked she hadn't silenced the phone. More angry whispering with mentions, Legos. It was glorious. No, they never found out it was me. Loose lips sink ships, and this is the first time I've told this story since then. Dee and I never crossed paths again. Found out she had to take a lower paying position on her next gig due to all of the complaints levied against her, pulled with unprofessional behavior on the floor. She was a monster that preyed particularly on women she perceived as younger and prettier than herself, so most women. I had very little to do with her downfall, but the satisfaction of getting a little petty revenge was an astonishingly satisfying position. Moral of the story: be human to those you work with, especially those who work for you. They can F your shit up as fast as the person handling your food. And they will F your shit up if you go after one of their own. Story 28. Sent a sexy message from my boss to a customer. I used to work at a restaurant that functioned as a bar in the evenings. The brunch was always super busy, but the evenings were always dead, and that was my bartending shift. For context, my nickname was 26.50 on account of the fact that one evening I sold $26.50 worth of booze over 6 hours. People rarely came in. Because of this, I was often tasked with doing prep for the brunch rush the next morning. Cracking eggs, peeling potatoes, and of course roll-ups. For the uninitiated, when you go to a restaurant and they give you your cutlery rolled up in a napkin, that's a roll-up. And someone does hundreds of those by hand. My boss was generally a jerk who seemingly enjoyed tasking me with shitty jobs, toilets and such, and had been a particular prick that evening before he left. The restaurant was small and I knew he'd be slinging brunch the next morning, so in one of the roll-ups, I wrote something along the lines of, "I think you're hot. Would you go out with me? Check one. Yes. No." Then included his phone number. Then put it in the pile to go out the next morning during the rush and went home. The next morning I got a text reading, "You are such a goddamn MF." That was awesome, but still, you are MF. Apparently a couple had walked in and he'd given the roll-up in question to the guy, who was super weirded out and confused, asking if it was for him or his girlfriend. My boss had no concept of what was happening, so he was equally weirded out by this guy handing him this napkin with his own phone number on it. It was apparently amazing. Story 29. High school bully regrets decision. I'm 52 and I still think about this moment from high school, rolling on the floor laughing. I had English class with this entitled Preppy a hole. He was cocky and mean and made fun of my overweight shy friend in class. He was basically just a P*ick and sat right in front of me. He was constantly leaning his head back onto my desk and I kept asking him to stop. I told him if he did it one more time, he'd regret it. I had a newly sharpened pencil and I held it tip up on my desk. When he leaned back, he stabbed himself in the head, and just as I said, he instantly learned not to do it again, rolling on the floor laughing, rolling on the floor laughing. I realize now that could have been dangerous, but at 17 I didn't think about it. According to people I know in my hometown, he's still an asshole, so it didn't do any permanent damage. It's given me permanent joy though, lol. Story 30. Sauce for the goose. We were driving down a 2-lane highway when an emergency vehicle appeared in our rear-view mirror with lights flashing and sirens screaming. We pulled over to the side of the road. The pickup truck behind us passed us and pulled over in front of us, even though there was plenty of room to pull in behind us. After the emergency vehicle went by, the pickup was slow getting back on the road, so we went around it. The driver honked and yelled at us. Apparently we offended him by using the emergency vehicle to get ahead of him. But it was okay for him to use it to get ahead of us. Note: for people not from the USA, all states have laws requiring drivers to pull over when an emergency vehicle approaches. My state requires it to be done immediately. It is considered gauche to use this to get ahead of other drivers, but there is no law against it. Story 31. Line cutters at a resort hotel breakfast buffet. Until 3 days ago, I was staying at a nice resort hotel in the Philippines. There were a lot of families there from many ethnicities, as the local Cebuanos could not afford this hotel. I was in line at the omelet making station when one woman who wasn't in line walks up to the person in front of me and says something in their shared language. "Can I cut in behind you?" It's a long line. For brigading reasons, I'm not going to say what language it was, but suffice it to say I speak enough of that language to know what they were doing. I was surprised because, besides me, there were only 4 people behind me and 3 people in front. Anyway, she successfully cuts in. I was thinking of saying something, but instead I got petty. She got to the front of the line and filled up a small plate with the omelet fixings she wanted and passed the plate to the cook. She cooks it up, no problem. Then it's my turn. As the line cutter's getting her omelet back, she notices that I took the crispy bacon from another station and shredded them behind her and had added it to my omelet fixings plate. I can see the envy already, but I decide to be pettier. I ask the omelet chef in my politest voice, "May I have some cheese, please?" The line cutter woman's eyes kinda went big when she realized she could have had cheese, which wasn't really an option at the fixing station, but I'd seen others ask the day before, and bacon on her basic-ass omelet. To top it off, at least 2 of the people behind me started ordering the same, from what I saw. I hope it caught on. And the omelet was frigging delicious. Take that, you line cutter. Story 32. All over a $60 internet bill. Oh boy. There is some backstory here to give some context. I am currently renting a house from my niece's father, who is currently serving a small prison sentence. I rented the house because I was in need of a place to stay and he was running out of time to get his house ready for tenants. He had been remodeling before he was locked up and sent to county jail for 7 months until he was sentenced. It was livable, but there is unfinished flooring. Needs some trim, the temporary plywood countertops need real ones installed, doors are broken and need replacing, etc. Mostly smaller work considering I'm a contractor and I could blow these jobs out fast, and the idea was to take the work off the rent. Inmate's mother is who I am dealing with for paying rent. The inmate and I discussed rent to be $1,600 per mo. This would include covering the mortgage, water, sewer, and internet service. All of these items are fixed cost, meaning they do not fluctuate like gas and electric will, so I pay those direct with the bill that comes to the house. Along with this, I would do some of the work around here while he was gone. Specifically speaking, on the internet. We discussed it would be easier for him to not have to pay to cancel his service and have it taken from the rent. Especially considering we do not get a physical bill sent to the house. The bill only shows up on the app that is on the phone in inmate's mother's possession. Here's where things gets crazy. Few days ago the internet was out, so I messaged his mother and let her know. When she was able to respond, she informed me the bill hadn't been paid and proceeds to send me the monthly statements. At that point I explained what our agreement was. She isn't hearing any of it. Refuses to believe this was the agreement. I simply don't want to pay for something I was under the impression I already paid for. Not to mention I don't even have access to the bill to pay it. And if I had to ask you for the bill every month, this doesn't make sense. I'll just get my own service. Pretty simple situation. Well, that is exactly what I did. This conversation with inmate's mother took place at 7 p.m. I was on the phone with a new internet service provider by 8 p.m. and had install set for the next day by 9 a.m. Installer came early and I had internet by 9:15 a.m. Well, now you will pay for those outstanding statements yourself, and you'll be paying the company $300 contract cancellation fee. Also, any of the work I was planning on doing, I will now invoice time and material at $75 per hour. Still cheaper than I bill out. The money is peanuts to me. I don't care about the $60, I just wanted to have a civil discussion about it. Even after all of this, I'm actually paying more because I'm not subtracting the original internet service from rent. Admittedly, where I screwed up was not getting it in writing before this guy went to prison. But it's whatever. I found a solution and moved on. Story 33. Are you contagious? About a year and a half ago I, female 40, was diagnosed with ocular shingles. I don't recommend. Part of the healing process is the scabbing over of the blisters, which were present on my eyelid, eyebrow, and forehead on one side. In accordance with medical direction, I was not contagious once the scabbing started, and it was about 5 days after the onset of scabbing when the fateful encounter occurred. I woke up that morning like any other morning except for the hideous scabbing, makeup not recommended. I could not wear a baseball cap to hide face since the scabs were painful to the touch and you don't want to touch them because of the threat of scarring if they come off too soon. So I put a hoodie on and hoped that would make me not stand out so much. I kept my head down while shopping in my local grocery store and avoided eye contact and communication. As I'm at the self-checkout line, I hear a voice from behind me yell my name. I turned around so confused that someone recognized me and realized it was my mom's cousin, female 65, who was the checker on the first check stand next to the self-checkout. Before I could even say hi, she blurts out, loudly, in front of 10 other people checking out, and about 10 more people in line, "I am surprised to see you here. Aren't you contagious?" I was mortified but mostly annoyed because I had just started ringing up my cart. I respond, "It's not contagious, thanks for your concern," and I turned back around ignoring whatever she said after. This woman is known for having zero filter and sticks her nose in other people's business on the regular. So then I had people leaving their self-checkouts before they're done and just walking out and leaving their food to avoid me. Other people stared and shook their heads. I finished ringing myself up and left. Fast forward to yesterday. I recently became friends with someone who works with her and I saw him last night. I decided to tell him a juicy little bit of knowledge that she is embarrassed about and has always been insecure about. She had to have a skin graft on her shin years ago and they used cadaver foreskin. She used to complain about it because hair never grows on that patch, lol, free laser. Her new name is Dick Shin now, and when he asks her about it he's going to ask if they tested it for STDs and if she is contagious. It's only fair. If you love good revenge stories, subscribe for more satisfying petty payback.